everyone, my name is Pourya Vaziri. Today I will be presenting our work on how to control memory footprint of a stateful streaming graph processing. This is a joint work with my advisor, Dr. Keval Vora at Simon Fraser University. Analyzing graph data has become a crucial component in many application domains including navigation, web analysis, social network analytics, and machine learning. In practice, graphs are often dynamic in nature. So, we have streaming graph systems that capture the constantly changing nature of these dynamic graphs. In this setting, we have a single graph structure that is updated using a continuous stream of vertex and edge updates. And the goal is to maintain the freshmost results for the recentmost snapshot at any given point in time. Since the overall structure of graph often changes gradually over time, streaming graph systems use incremental computation, where they reuse the previously computed results and adjust them based on the changes in the graph structure. By doing so, they eliminate majority of unnecessary computation, which allows them to deliver low latency results. Now, incremental computation needs to keep track of the intermediate values as computation progresses. This is what we call a stateful iterative processing model, where the values computed in each superstep or iteration are tracked as intermediate states so that the impact of graph updates is incrementally computed in form of changes to the intermediate state. And remember, graph computation are iterative. So we have an initial state, which usually is initial vertex values, and then as values are exchanged between neighbors in each iteration, we have the intermediate state on each vertex. As you can imagine, a stateful iterative processing would have a very large memory footprint. To understand how much memory would be required on practical graph application, we profiled GraphBolt, a recent state-of-the-art streaming graph processing system. GraphBolt enables efficient incremental processing on streaming graphs, and it does so without compromising on correctness guarantees. So it is used for a wide variety of graph algorithms, spanning from traditional algorithms like BFS, SSSP, to more challenging algorithms like collaborative filtering and co-training expectation maximization. We wanted to see how much memory is consumed by GraphBolt. So here, I'm showing different graph applications running on GraphBolt on the x-axis, and on y-axis, we have the memory footprint in gigabytes. So lower is better here. As expected, the memory footprint for all applications is very high. But just to give some context of how high this really is, here I'm also showing the memory consumed by different components of the execution. So we have memory consumed by the graph data structure alone, which is shown in green here, and then the memory for the final state, that is the result values of the graph application, which is shown in orange. Everything in addition to that, which is the blue color over here, is the memory consumed by the intermediate state. So for the graph application, like PageRank and CoEM, where only 4-byte or 8-byte values are tracked per vertex, the size of intermediate state is tolerable. However, for applications like collaborative filtering or label propagation, especially with larger label set like LP5 and LP10, the footprint is very large. This is mainly because the intermediate states are much larger compared to other components. Such high memory footprints significantly limit the applicability of stateful processing on large streaming graphs, and so it becomes crucial to develop stateful iterative models that do not demand large memory capacities just to hold the intermediate states. In this work, we present two memory-efficient stateful iterative models that actively control the memory footprint while still enabling incremental computation for efficiency. First is the selective stateful iterative model that tracks only a subset of intermediate states. And then we have the minimal stateful iterative model that exploits certain key properties in graph computation in order to aggressively prune out the intermediate state to be tracked. Both of these models not only scale stateful iterative processing on larger graphs, but they also retain the benefits of incremental computation to maintain low latencies. First is the selective stateful iterative model. This technique is based on two key insights. The first insight is that vertex computation within an iteration are independent of each other. So incrementally computing a vertex value is only dependent on the intermediate state saved for that vertex, and it is not dependent on the state for other vertices. And the second key insight is that usefulness of different portion of the intermediate state is different. This means intermediate states for certain vertices would end up reducing more computation than those for other vertices. Based on these insights, our selective stateful iterative model selects only a subset of the intermediate vertex states. Basically, this means we can tune the amount of incremental processing that is performed based on the available memory. So if we have very low memory capacity, then we track very little intermediate state. On the other hand, if we have a large amount of available memory capacity, then we utilize it to hold more intermediate state, which also increases the benefit from incremental computation. While all of this sounds great, realizing it in practice is not straightforward, mainly due to two challenges. First is how to identify what intermediate state to track and what state can be discarded. And second, how to perform incremental computation with missing intermediate state. I'll explain how to solve these challenges next. To identify how much intermediate state to track, we estimate the memory footprint by modeling the space for different components of the runtime. This includes the data graph frontiers and the intermediate states. And then we simply minimize the difference between the available memory budget and the estimated footprint, which gives us the largest number of vertices for which intermediate state can be safely tracked. Now that we know how much intermediate state should be tracked, the next question is, for which specific vertices should the tracking be enabled? This can be answered easily by identifying which vertices demand the most computation. As we already know, high in degree vertices require more computation because more values get propagated to them. So, when their intermediate states are available, only change in values will be propagated to them, which will drastically reduce their computation. Hence, we track the intermediate state for highest in degree vertices. Okay, so the next main challenge is how to perform incremental computation using only the partial intermediate state. For this, we develop a selective incremental processing technique. Basically, our strategy captures the nuances of the interaction between vertices with intermediate states and those without intermediate states to make sure that the vertices in the latter set correctly participate in incremental computation. In a nutshell, this boils down to two cases depending on the type of the target vertex. If the target vertex is track vertex, which I am showing here as the green vertex V, then only the difference in values get propagated from the sources. On the other hand, if the target is not track vertex, then both the old value and the new value are propagated so that the target can correctly compute the change. The beauty of our strategy is that these cases are purely local, in that they are dependent on nothing other than the type of the target vertex. So they can be taken care of as and when they occur while propagating values, instead of having a specialized processing phases or supersteps. That was our selective stateful iterative model. Next, we present the minimal stateful iterative model. Here, we specialize the incremental processing for certain algorithms that involve purely distributive operations, which we model as the distributive update property. So what is the distributive update property? It basically states that the computation for a single vertex can be fully distributed into sub-computations on subset of its inputs. I'll skip the theoretical details of this property here. If interested, check out our paper. The cool thing about this property is that it enables us to directly compute the change in a vertex output value using only the incoming changes it gets without requiring to track or reconstruct the intermediate states. This property is general enough and it captures a big group of graph algorithms. For example, computation in PageRank, COEM, cut metrics, path-based functions like SSSP, connected components, and several others satisfy the distributive update property. Again, a comprehensive study of what kind of computation are supported or not supported is present in the paper. Okay, so now that we have identified this important property, our minimal stateful iterative model exploits it. Basically, our model just propagates the changes directly without tracking the intermediate values. This means it aggressively prunes out the amount of intermediate state, making the entire execution lightweight. Note that some intermediate state is still tracked, because that state forms the basis for certain value changes. And this little state corresponds only to the mutation points, which can be determined based on the use cases. For example, performing what-if analysis around certain vertices, or replaying historical streams, or identifying hot regions where mutations are likely to occur. There are several important details about our memory-efficient models that I haven't covered in this talk. For example, we developed a strategy to dynamically maintain the top k in degree vertices to continuously capture better candidates for tracking as they arrive. We also developed an optimized graph layout that actively reduces expensive branch operations from the critical path. To know more about these techniques, I invite you to read our paper. Moving on to evaluation. We incorporated both of our memory-efficient models in the GraphBolt framework so that we can truly analyze their performance while keeping all the other runtime-specific details constant. We used 7 synchronous graph algorithms and 5 real-world graph datasets, and we performed all experiments on a 24-core server with 320 GB main memory. Since our focus is memory footprint, we profiled the memory consumption for each execution as well as the execution times, and we compared these numbers with two baselines. First, the GraphBolt execution, which consumes a lot of intermediate state and performs the fastest due to its incremental computation strategy, and second, the processing strategy that restarts execution from scratch whenever the graph gets updated and doesn't track any intermediate state. We call this the stateless execution, and it consumes the least amount of memory. Here I am showing the performance of our selective stateful iterative model. On the x-axis, we have our selective model where the percentage of vertices whose intermediate state is tracked is varied from 20 to 80%. And then we have GraphBolt on the right, which tracks the entire intermediate state, and the stateless execution on the left. The bars indicate the memory consumption in gigabytes, shown on the left axis. So lower is better here. And the points in red indicate the execution times in seconds, shown on the right axis. As expected, our selective model gracefully balances memory consumption with execution time. As the percentage of tracked vertices increases, it consumes memory and delivers faster results. Interestingly, by tracking only 20% of vertices, the memory footprint reduces by up to 70%, while still retaining 80% of the performance benefit achieved by GraphBolt. This is mainly because of our highest degree-based tracking strategy that prioritizes tracking of those intermediate values that are expected to be most useful. We also observed cases where GraphBolt ran out of memory, but our selective stateful iterative model successfully executed and delivered faster results than the stateless execution. I'm showing one such case here with the red bar. Finally, with the minimal stateful iterative model, we track very little state, so it consumes much less memory compared to GraphBolt while delivering nearly the same performance. Compared to the stateless execution, the memory footprint increases by only 30%, but the performance gain is up to 8.2 times. There are detailed experiments with different graph applications and input graphs, and with varying runtime parameters like mutation batch sizes. We highly encourage you to check out the paper for the detailed evaluation. In conclusion, techniques like GraphBolt and DZIG enable efficient incremental processing on dynamic graphs to compute fast results. In this work, we take the next important step to make such incremental processing practical on large dynamic graphs. We developed two memory-efficient stateful iterative models, where the key in limiting the memory footprint is in selectively tracking the intermediate vertex values for only a subset of vertices. Our selective stateful iterative model tunes the memory footprint depending on the available memory to maximize the benefit of incremental processing. And our minimal stateful iterative model exploits the distributive update property to aggressively prune out the intermediate state. Our memory-efficient models demand low memory footprint and retain performance benefit from incremental processing, which breaks the barrier of scaling to larger graphs with limited memory. Thank you.